USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Edge for Friday, December 1st, 2023. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin. What a slate of games we've got to go through this week. We're in the hot and heavy part of the college hockey season, and a lot of in-league matchups with some teams that have a lot on the line. Let's start out with this one. Two teams that I would have to say have surprised all three of us in how well they've been playing this year. New Hampshire travels to Maine. It's a rivalry game. Plus the teams are doing well. New Hampshire is plus 170. Maine is minus 220 in this one.
I don't want to even call it a rivalry game. I think in Hockey East, it's the rivalry. And BCBU people can go ahead and kill me for that, but there's not the passion about a rivalry as there is Maine and New Hampshire. I was up there to call this game a couple of years ago in Orono, and it was below zero. And 2 hours before the game, there was a line that wrapped around the building of students trying to get their tickets to get into the game. People are passionate up there. They're passionate in Durham. It's everything to these two schools. In terms of the line, boy, that really shades toward Maine. It shows that the bookmakers still don't believe in UNH yet. And I don't know why. This is a good UNH team, probably one of the best they've had. Definitely the best they've had under Mike Souza. But I guess this is a line that I sit there and say, on the road at Orono, single game, it's probably properly set. And thus, with the shade so heavily toward Maine, I'd probably stay away from this one.
Jimmy, you know what I love about this rivalry is that this is the 146th matchup between these two teams, if memory serves right. Like these are teams that go back to the oldest days of hockey, before it was Hockey East, back into the set. And I know that's they've somehow managed to play even too. Like you have Maine with 70 wins, you have UNH with 60 odd wins. And I love the fact that this kind of exists a little bit on the outside of the perimeter of Hockey East, where everyone in Hockey East and everyone kind of hones in on Boston, and myself included, because I never get outside the city. Let's just be honest on my travel habits, where if it's not on the MBTA, I'm probably not going. But the thing that I love the most about this is that it is one of those rivalries where the odds really don't matter. That said, I hate the fact that UNH was made the underdog on this. I know it's in Maine, and I know that I'm sitting here saying that I wouldn't have loved – if Maine were the underdog, I'd probably love Maine as a home dog. I'm looking at UNH, and I think one of the worst things that could have happened for Maine was UNH losing last week. That is going to cause a problem, because I know Maine's been sliding a little bit. Maine's played BC and BU, and – those are teams that maybe was a coming back to earth moment. UNH has lost that one game to RIT, and to me, that is the hiccup that I would have expected this week. Instead, now that they had it, and since I'm buying in on UNH a bit this year, I'm making UNH kind of my. I love them as an underdog in this. Like, I just love and they're not going to be intimidated by Alphon. They're not going to be intimidated by that arena.
How about the over/under of 5.5?
It's right. Last year, these two teams played. One was a 0-0 tie. The other was a 2-2 tie. But you go back just a couple of years, I do think these teams look a lot different than they did 2 years ago, particularly UNH. And I think it was a 5-2, 6-3 games back to back. And those were the last two games we played in Orono. So it was a split the last time they were up in Orono. I'm almost talking myself into liking UNH, to be honest with you, because of the price. I hate it that this game is on the road. I know that you say that you don't think they'll be intimidated. I know they won't, but I remember calling a game there 2 years ago, and it was 4-0 before the ice dried. And the building was so loud that you couldn't hear yourself think. And even as UNH started to come back in that game, a shorthanded goal by Maine put them back up. And that's the type of things that can happen at the Alphon. Random weird things happen in that arena. That's not to take anything away from Maine and the way they play up there. Ben Barr has his team playing really well, and they love playing at home. I just think it's a tough game for UNH, but if you're looking for a little bit of value now, I'm kind of almost thinking, plus 170, not a bad price.
The one thing about the over under, just to kind of close up on that, is that Maine is averaging under 3 goals allowed per game this year. That's kind of one of those things that make me hate betting the over under here, because it's so good. Like, it is such a good number. Maine is a very good defensive team. UNH also averaging under 3 goals per game. So if we're looking at a 5.5, 5.5?
5.5.
I mean, that lines up to land. If you're looking 2.5, freaky deaky goal one way or the other, and now you're hitting the over. So I'd avoid the over under, on this one like the plague. But I love this game. I love this matchup. I've been circling this one for a couple weeks.
So here's one for you that probably nobody will know till almost game time, which is difficult, is which goaltender is New Hampshire going to start? Jakob Helston has been platooning. He has a 1.3 goals against. He came into last Saturday's game with a 0.99 goals against, and he's well above .930 in save percentage. He's been terrific for them so far this season. Is there anything you can do about it? Do you hold off until the last moment till you find out who the starter is, or what do you do in that situation?
It makes me avoid it more. I hate to say that, because of that uncertainty. But the reality is that Muslik is excellent in net for UNH as well. He's been pretty steady. But you're right, Hellstad. Now that he's getting more time in net, he wasn't at the beginning of the year. He has been getting a few more starts of late, and it does feel like it's a split every weekend for them. That it does make it a more difficult decision. It doesn't feel like it's his start, if you know what I'm saying. Like, if you're doing some sort of rotation, then it's probably not his start, but he does have the better numbers.
And it's only a 1-game weekend. That's the other part. It's only a 1-game series. They're playing on Friday, and then UNH is off for a week. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, maybe it makes the decision a little bit easier, because you're just assuming you go with the hot hand, because Maine has to come back on Sunday and play UConn.
Well, let's look at the next one on our schedule, and it's also in Hockey East. Boston University, they stumbled a little out of the gate, but they've been playing very well. They take on Merrimack in a rematch of last spring's Hockey East championship game. The lines on this one, Boston University is minus 166. Merrimack plus 130. The over-under is 6.
The interesting thing, because we're talking about the Friday matchup, is that this series opens at North Andover, and anybody will tell you that is a more difficult building to play in. This is a rematch of last year's Hockey East title game. There's going to be a lot of hunger, I think, for Merrimack in this one, a lot. And, they have not shown how good they are as a team. This is a very similar team to the one that they had last year that went to the Hockey East finals and lost to Boston University. So obviously at home, you're only going to get a plus 130 price, so it's not that valuable. I kind of like Merrimack here just because of the fact that their rink is just so hard to play in, and teams don't have success there. And I also think that Merrimack is ready to burst out, and this could be the series that maybe turns them around. This you got to think this has been one of the most lopsided series of any two teams in Hockey East. I mean, BU has won. I don't have it in front of me, but it's got to be about 75 to 80% of the games in this series all time. And last year, it seemed that Merrimack was finally going to get its right. They have a 1-0 lead late in the Hockey East championship game, only to have BU score. I think it was Quinn Hudson that tied it, and then Lane Hudson, his brother, won it in overtime. But this team did a good job shutting down BU, and I know that BU has a few more weapons, especially a kid named Celebrini. But I look at this, and this could be the game that gets Merrimack right, and I'm going to kind of go with that. And even though 130 is not a great price, plus 130, I'd still, if I had to make a choice, I'd be going Merrimack in this one.
There are two things about BU that not concern me. I don't know if concerning's the right word, but there are two things about BU that I've kind of hammered over the course of the year. One is that if you believe in their defense has gotten a little bit better. The Quinnipiac game, they played better. Part of it was that Quinnipiac and BU, neither one of them played particularly well in the first two periods, and that third period was phenomenal. Like, that was a great third period. Caron and Duplessis went head to head a bit in that third period, and BU came back from down 2-0 to win 3-2 in a game that made you feel like everybody played well in the third period. But then the Cornell game, they lost 2-1 down at Madison Square, and Caron didn't even face that many shots. So if you're believing that the defense is going to get better, but then they lose a 2-1 game involving not a whole lot of shots, now I'm starting to get concerned again. And I think that BU is a really, really good team. I think they could figure this out before the year is over. But better going up to Merrimack. Merrimack, I think, ages out a little bit better. Like, I remember reading that like Merrimack's just a little bit of an older age team.
Oh, much older.
BU obviously has the talent, but older age team. There's just that maturity factor that makes me like Merrimack in this as a bet. If I'm looking at who's the underdog and is it a good value bet. I also think Merrimack played really well against Army and Bentley last week, so that's rights the ship after the Lowell series.
Well, we're going to work our way westward when USCHO Edge continues. More of USCHO Edge. Let's talk Michigan and Notre Dame. I've got to wonder if the odds makers are down on both teams on this one. Michigan is minus 130, Notre Dame plus 100. The over-under is 6. Things have not been great for Notre Dame and definitely down this year for Michigan.
Surprisingly down for Michigan. I think they have more talent than the level that they're playing to right now. This one's a tough one for me. If this one's in Michigan, I think that the line is, significantly slanted toward Michigan, just because neither team has played their best hockey of late at all. I mean, I want to take that back. For Michigan to go on the road and basically get a win and a tie, a shutout at St. Cloud, that's pretty good for them. They had the split with Penn State before that. They, had a tie and a shootout win and a loss against Minnesota. They, got swept by Wisconsin. They hammered Lindenwood, took care of business there. So I guess the best series to go back and kind of measure where maybe Michigan is compared to a team that's maybe not at the top of the Big Ten is the Ohio State series. And they did really well in the opener and then had a shootout loss in game 2. I think the biggest problem here for Michigan is consistency. And I think you could say the same thing about Notre Dame. I just don't think you're getting enough value to bet Michigan, and you definitely are not getting enough value to bet Ohio State in this one. So I hate to sound like a broken record here and sound like the most like I don't want to bet my money, but I like to give advice based on if I had to put my money where I would put it, I wouldn't put it anywhere in this one. This isn't one of those that really appeals to me. We said the over under on this. I'm just trying to look it up. Is 6. Again, well set line. If this was like 6.5, 7, I'd stay under. If it was 5.5, I'd probably go over. But 6 is probably, I feel a 4-2 game coming here in a push, or a 3-2 game. And if I bet the over, then I'm going to get screwed because nobody hits the damn empty net. One of those types of nights. So I love this series. I just don't love having to put money on it.
Well, I'll tell you what, if this hits the over, then I think I'm taking Michigan because the difference is Michigan is averaging 4-something goals per game. Notre Dame is not.
Yes.
And that makes a big difference to me because the lower score, but neither team's been really bad defensively. And I feel like both of these teams, if this is going to hit an under, if you think this is going to hit an under, then it's probably going to go Notre Dame's way because Michigan's offense is not scoring. And that's how they've won a lot of their games. Like, they're averaging 4-something goals per game. Notre Dame to me is at home. I hate betting this one. I actually can't stand this one either in terms of but gun to my head, I'm probably taking Notre Dame here, because when you look at some of the numbers too, the special teams numbers, you start splitting hairs. Notre Dame has a very good penalty kill. Michigan is much more high risk, high reward. And I don't think the value is there on this game to go high risk, high reward with a team that is scoring 30% of its power play goals, but giving up a quarter of its power plays and it's on the kill. Michigan isn't particularly strong on the kill right now. So I don't like something about Michigan right now. And I think that's kind of holding me back from saying pick them. At the same time, I'm also holding back on Notre Dame because it's not there. I mean, the win over Minnesota aside, I don't quite feel like they've given me enough to confidently bet them. So I would go, though, Notre Dame and under, Michigan and over, if you're letting the over-under dictate what you want to do. But I hate the over-under too. So, I mean, I love the number. I just hate betting it.
I was going to say something about goaltending, but Ryan Bischel has turned things around and his numbers have been improving. Jake Barczewski, the grad student transfer, his numbers are solid, if not, I mean, they're not spectacular, but they're pretty solid. So I guess I don't figure that into that, but Bischel's the kind of guy who has been known to have some spectacular games.
A guy that will steal games. There's no doubt. I mean, if you're looking for the goaltender that could steal games, it's Bischel in this matchup. I'm trying to find a reason to love one of these teams, and with this line, I just don't. If these lines were, if Michigan was more of an even money, or even on the road a slight dog, I'd be all over Michigan. But you're just not getting any value. You're gonna have to lay money to bet a team that hasn't been consistent. Playing a team that is defensively structured and for the most part is able to keep out of track meets. And I think that's the way Notre Dame, it's a bit of an upset if Notre Dame wins this, in my opinion. I'm not sure that everybody would consider it that. But it's not that far of a stretch to know how they would get to that upset. They play solid defense, shut down a fast moving offense. That's how you win.
And part of that too with the defensive look is that when we look at the goaltenders, I should say, is that on the other side of it, Jake Barczewski, Ed, you and I saw him a lot when we were in Atlantic hockey when he was at Canisius, and I thought he was a very good goaltender, but I didn't think he was the goaltender who's going to go out and steal the game. I know I'd seen a couple of his a little more tougher outings when Canisius was out here in the East, and that to me is part of it, which is, I think he's a very good goalie. Can he be a goalie that goes out and steals a game? I mean, yeah, he did kind of have all those, the accolades with Canisius, which made sense, when he comes out and wins the championship. But he also didn't see a ton of shots from Atlantic hockey. And I think the Big Ten is offering him a step up in challenge, which is, I just am not there on him going out and stealing a game against Notre Dame. I think he has to have the defense playing well in front of him. And I don't particularly think Michigan's that well structured defensively. So I don't want to hammer the poor guy. I think I just did enough of that. And I really do think he's a good goalie. But we're doing the lineup against a Notre Dame goalie in Bischel, who I think is really good. Like I really like Bischel as a goalie.
Next matchup is also in the Big Ten, Minnesota and Penn State. The Gophers had a tie with a shootout loss to Michigan State and an overtime win last weekend, while Penn State was home with 2 blowouts over Lindenwood. On this one, Minnesota is minus 150. Penn State's a plus 120. The over-under, surprisingly, still in single digits at 6.5.
I think you're actually telling us you want to bet the over, Ed. I get that, but then I actually look back, in recent matchups. Last year, the final scores, all in favor of Minnesota. 3-2 in overtime, 7-2. That game was out in University Park as well. And then 3-1. Those were the last three in a 4-2 win for Penn State. That was last season. So you'd think that these two teams would put up, maybe 13 goals a game. And listen, I think in my actual Edge column, I told people to hammer the over on Lindenwood Penn State, and it went over and way over on Friday night. Maybe they've gotten themselves right and they've found their scoring. And if so, then watch out Minnesota. But I think that Minnesota can play some pretty good defense too. They get their scoring. It's almost the broken record of the Big Ten this year, that everybody is a little bit inconsistent. And I think the inconsistency is generated by how strong this league is top to bottom. It's very similar to what we saw in Hockey East last year. You didn't know on a given weekend which teams would be able to pull out the win. But all of them were pretty darn good. And they could go into most games as a favorite or an underdog any night. But you'd almost, if they were playing teams outside of their conference, you'd always be the favorite. That's the same situation here with the Big Ten. So when you're in conference play, it's hard to pick the favorite. It's getting more difficult to pick who would win these games. The track records kind of seem to favor Minnesota here. They've won, I'm just trying to pull up 7 of the last 8. And even it goes even further back than that. You can do 9 out of the last 11. So it favors Minnesota strongly. It wasn't too bad of a price to have to lay because they're on the road. I don't mind Minnesota in this one. And over under 6.5. I feel like this one could go under.
I'm gonna hammer the over because it's the Big Ten, and we all know that I'm just gonna, at this point, it's gonna be, I'm gonna take the, if it looks like it, if it smells like it, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it smells like a duck, go with the duck. It's gonna go over. I will say this: is it me, or does it feel like whoever is number one just doesn't like? There's like 9 teams that could probably be number one right now. Like, I look at Minnesota and I see them number 7 in the poll, and I think to myself, well, they win a couple more games. The right teams lose, they'll be back at number 1. And then when they're number 1, they'll get knocked out and they'll lose. So since they're number 7, I think Minnesota is going to win, because I got that vibe that in the ebbs and flows of a season, Minnesota is a quintessential team that's going to climb and then fall. Just like I think North Dakota and Boston College are eventually going to slip out of the top 2. I think someone's going to rise up and grab it. And then, because I think those top 8 or 9 teams in the country are just like, you could make a case for all of them. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from on Minnesota, which is Minnesota right now is the hunter. They're one of those teams that's going to rise. That's had their little bit of slip. They've had their slip against Michigan State. They've had the little bit of inconsistency with Notre Dame. They had a bit of inconsistency dating back even to Minnesota Duluth. So I think they're going to straighten it out and take off, and then eventually they'll hit the ebb and dip down. They're just not going to hit it this weekend.
North Dakota and Denver, a big matchup in the NCHC. The Fighting Hawks come off a 3-2 overtime win and a 5-0 win hosting Bemidji last weekend. 5-0 and 9-0 stompings of Yale for Denver at home last weekend. You've got the number 1 offense in the country in Denver and the number 10 offense in North Dakota. Second defense, but 20th defense for Denver, second in the nation for North Dakota. This one has Denver minus 125 and North Dakota minus 105, pretty close there. And an over-under, probably stimulated by the 5.5 goals a game that Denver's putting up, thanks in no small part to last weekend. The over-under is 7.
Yeah, well, we talked about the great rivalry between Maine and New Hampshire. I don't think you consider this a rivalry as much, but this is the 163rd time these two teams have played, and I don't know how many opponents on Denver's schedule hold a winning record against them. North Dakota has 1, but I say that, and at home, Denver has a significant edge in this series. Denver swept last year's series. The last time that North Dakota had a win in this series was November 6, 2021. I just think that this North Dakota team is a lot different than the teams that faced over the last couple of seasons faced Denver. These have not been low-scoring games, but at 7, I look at the past in the numbers, the game totals of the last 4 games played: 7, 8, 9, and 5. Before that, 5, 4, 3, 7, and 3. So that 7 number scares me a lot. It should go over based on just team stats. But when these teams play, you can expect more of a 3-2, 4-3 type of game. And if it's 4-3 with the empty net, you go over. It's just too dangerous to bet that one. Um, you know, when you look at the actual line on this one, having neither team is a true favorite. It's truly a total pick 'em at -105 for North Dakota, -125 for Denver. I just don't know that you're going to get Denver -125 at home again this year. You're going to see more like -200, -225, -300 or higher. And I feel like their offense knows where they're going. I like Denver in this one, even though I have a lot of confidence in North Dakota. And we talked to Brad Berry earlier in the week, and he said a lot of good things about his team, but he knows that this is a rock fight when you go and play a team like Denver. It's a tough series. It's an emotional series, and I feel like these two teams, they match up very well with each other.
One of the things that I look at in this is the altitude factor, which I know teams going to Colorado, it doesn't impact them as much. There's more study and strength coaches understand how to keep guys' energies up when they're in the altitude. They know how to regulate things. They know how to get them going. I don't think it's as big of a factor, but I think going to Denver when you have two teams that are evenly matched still plays a factor, at least in the fact that Denver's always good at home. Like that to me is the crowd, the skill level of the team. Now throw 5,000 feet of altitude into the mix. It's still a factor when you get into the third period if you're not used to it. So I like Denver here. I like the over in terms of, because I like Denver. I will say that good defenses in terms of the number, I think that number for North Dakota is skewed a bit just from the fact that, there really aren't going to be many teams over the course of the season that have goals against under 2. And I think what they've done against some of the teams, it's been helped by the fact that they did play Miami and held them to 5 goals. They did shut out Bemidji. They did shut out Minnesota Duluth on the road. I think that, or I should say, it's more impressive given that they have some of those teams on the schedule. I just like Denver here. Same idea that I was getting at. You have a team that's number 2 in the country with more first place votes. There's a whole bunch that kind of goes into the conversation. I just, based on what I've said, where I think the teams that rise up to the top of the rankings eventually slide back, and then someone else has to come up. What I was saying about Minnesota, I think this is one of those games where you'll see Denver win it. Maybe Denver goes up to number 1, and then Denver will start to slide back at some point. They'll have a couple weeks run. That's just the ebb and flow of college hockey season, and you want to hit it at the right time. But I don't like North Dakota, given the fact that they haven't lost since, I think, early November. Maybe they're, as I like to say, they're due, and then they'll kick it back into gear when it comes time to play Colorado College next week. So I don't think this is going to dictate who wins the NCHC. I don't think this is going to dictate who's number 1 come the end of the year. But I just think right now in Denver, it's almost like it's time. That's how I feel right now. It's time. It's Denver's turn, and Denver's probably the safer bet for me.
I will say I see this as a split this weekend. Yes. So this might be one where you watch and see if there's a line on Saturday and go against whoever wins on Friday.
Yeah.
And you might get a better price if you do that as well.
The one thing I'll also throw out there is and that's a great point, is that a lot of these numbers that we're seeing are going to be based on some of the more recent performances. And I don't think you can really put too much emphasis in Denver's 14 goals against Yale. I really don't. I know that it was at home, and 2, Yale is not the team that's going to go into Denver and beat them. They're just not that team right now. So that I wouldn't look at it and say, well, Denver's cranking. They scored 14 goals. They scored 9. They're going to be unbelievable. Take into account that Yale is a bottom 4 team in ECAC, which is not playing very well as a league overall in non-conference games.
I do believe you have to score goals to win.
Yes.
Yale didn't score a goal last weekend.
Yale did not score a goal.
So I guess we shouldn't have expected them to win. No, but I do. It also goes back to that. Sometimes you get that offense just cranking, and you get a lot of confidence off of that. And it's the same the other way. When you're struggling to score goals, you grip your stick a little tighter. When you're scoring goals at will, you get creative. You make plays that you wouldn't typically make, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that in the first night out of Denver.
But how about the carryover into that? And you think you can score goals that you really can't.
That's true too. That you get a little bit cocky. You start, those behind the back passes that you were making one weekend become pickoffs at the blue line and turns into a 2-on-1 or a breakaway the other way. So you do have to be careful of that factor as well.
Okay, I'm not the bookmaker you guys are, and I don't bet on this stuff. None of us bet on the college hockey games, but I don't see anything in this game that makes it worthwhile to even touch. It's too close. There's not a lot of money to be made. You can argue pretty strongly either way on the over-under. I'm running away from this one.
It's kind of been our theme this week. I hate to say it, I think I wrote about it in my column a few weeks ago. As the season goes on, the bookmakers get better. And especially in the day of AI, where you have so much data out there, and the further you get into season, you get even more data. The computers that they use and have been using long before, ChatGPT and all those softwares that might be writing your term paper for you. These bookmakers are very advanced in the technology, and once they get data, it's why you have to almost make your money in the first month of the season if you're a college hockey fan, because once these computers get the data, the bookmakers lines are much more accurate, and we're seeing that as the season goes on.
So one thing just to throw in there is kind of I wouldn't even call it an argument against that or debate wise, is that I like to think that there is money to be made, but you have to try and remove your emotion from it and really find a way to not game the computers. That's impossible. The computers exist and the bookmakers get smart because Vegas knows. They always know. They're always good about this, especially as data becomes available. But you can find ways to find teams that you want to ride a hot streak on versus teams that are also good. Like if you look at the poll and you see teams that are rising and falling, like I've been talking about this week, you also can look at the pairwise and find teams that are also very good. So, or statistically very good in the terms of the games that they've won. So you can find a path forward by saying, all right, is this team really this good, or are people just buying? Are they hot? Like you can find systems and you can find ways that if you look at the numbers, rather than just looking at one game and saying, okay, this team has a better goals against, this team has a better power play, you can find where the teams are playing better, where your teams are getting hot, like a Providence that's up to 8th in the pairwise and is starting to gain some respect in the poll, like a team like Maine that is 5th in the pairwise. So that means they've been playing really well, and they might not reflect it in the poll, but you can look at things and kind of balance the two and say, okay, people who watch college hockey like these teams, the computers hate it. Which one is right? Which one isn't? And balance back and forth. And is there a balance in there? I at least think it's an interesting conversation. I think it's one that if you're betting is worth having if you want to throw some pizza money down on any of these split games.
And do your homework. Find some really good columnists for some of these teams. We talk about our friend Brad Schlossman in Grand Forks. If you read his stuff, you will know every minute detail about North Dakota. There are other great writers out there too. Maybe there's some player that's out of the lineup. Maybe somebody's tweaked or, whoever, whatever. There's some little extra information that could be your edge in those games.
Yeah, this is not the NFL where that information is readily available. You have to kind of search it out in college hockey. So Ed, you make a really good point there.
Yeah, and to toot our horn a little bit too, if you have a team that you're interested in, you see what the coaches are saying in our weekly columns, you can almost say like, all right, there's a coach that has really liked the way his team is coming together. Look, you could say, is it coach speak? Is it not? Not to toot our own horn and slap ourselves on the back, but our columnists too, and some of our stuff that's out there, you'll find some really good takes from the coaches on things that have been working, things that haven't, and see what maybe you want to base it on. Not saying to use our columns for gambling purposes, to use our podcast for gambling purposes, right?
Well, and I'll close that saying with two sayings from my grandmother, which apparently contradict. One is, if you don't toot your own horn, who will? And don't break your arm patting yourself on the back.
Self high fives, baby. We're all over them.
Well, with that, we'll wrap up this edition of USCHO Edge. For Jim Connelly, for Dan Rubin, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.